Robert said it on a Saturday morning in September. We had just come back from dropping Claire at university. The last one, the youngest, our daughter, 22 years old and entirely ready for the world in the particular way of people who have been waiting for their life to begin and can feel it finally starting. We had helped her carry her things up to the 3rd floor. We had assembled the flat-pack desk, which took 40 minutes and one mild disagreement about which piece went where. We had taken her for lunch at a pub near the campus where she ordered a glass of wine with the casual ease of someone who had been doing it for years, which she had, and we had laughed about something I no longer remember. We had driven home. We had come into the kitchen. I had put the kettle on, and Robert had stood in the middle of the kitchen, our kitchen, the kitchen I had cooked 38 years of meals in, and he had looked around at the quiet of it, the particular deep quiet of a house that has held children and suddenly doesn't, and he had smiled. He said, "Well, now it's just us." He said it with satisfaction. He said it the way a man says something he has been looking forward to. I stood at the kettle with my back to him, and I felt something happen inside me that I cannot fully describe even now, 2 years later, with the benefit of distance and therapy, and a small flat of my own that smells like the candles I choose and nobody else. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was recognition. The particular cold clarity of recognizing something you have known for a long time but have been very carefully not looking at directly. I poured the water into the mugs. I said nothing, I just looked at him. 3 weeks later, I called a solicitor. "My name is Margaret. I am 62 years old. I was married for 38 years. I am about to tell you what those 38 years actually looked like, not from the outside, which was fine, which was perfectly respectable, which was the kind of marriage people called solid, but from the inside. From where I was standing, at the kettle, with my back to him. Before I take you back, if you're new here, welcome to Confessions Only. Every day a real story about the moment a woman stopped waiting and chose herself. If that's why you're here, hit subscribe. Now, let me show you 38 years. Robert and I met at a friend's wedding in 1985. He was 27. I was 24. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of confident that reads at 24 as security. He bought me a drink. He asked me questions and listened to the answers. He called me the following week, which in 1985 required actual effort and meant something. We dated for 2 years. We married in 1987 in a church in the town where I had grown up, with my mother in the front row crying the good kind of tears, and my father looking proud in a way he rarely permitted himself to look. We were, by any external measure, well matched. Robert was an engineer. I had been a teacher, secondary school English literature, a job I had loved with the particular love of someone who has found work that asks real things of them. When James was born in 1989, I took maternity leave. When I went back part-time, Robert said very reasonably, very calmly, that it might be simpler if I stayed home while the children were small, that his salary covered everything comfortably, that I could always return when they were older. I stayed home. Claire arrived in 1991. I stayed home for the next 15 years. I want to be careful about this part. I am not telling you that staying home to raise children is a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. My children are extraordinary people. James, who is 35 and teaches at a university himself now, with his father's precision and my love of language. Claire, who is 22 and fierce and funny and entirely her own person. I am not sorry for those years. What I am telling you is what happened to me inside them. The woman who had loved teaching, who had stayed up late marking essays and writing comments in the margins and genuinely, deeply cared whether a 15-year-old understood why Atticus Finch matters. That woman did not disappear when I had children. She just got very quiet. She got quieter year by year, in the way that things get quiet when they are not given room to make noise. When the days are full of school runs and packed lunches and dentist appointments and the management of a household that requires constant attention, there is not much space left for the self that existed before the household. I had told myself for 15 years that I would go back to teaching when Claire started secondary school. When Claire started secondary school, Robert pointed out that his hours had become longer and someone needed to be available for the children in the afternoons. I took a part-time role at the local library instead. Admin, filing, not teaching. I told myself it was fine. It was fine, not good, not what I had wanted. But fine. Fine is, I have come to understand, the most expensive word in the English language. I want to tell you about the thing I called our marriage. because from the outside it looked like a good one. Robert wasn't violent. He wasn't an alcoholic. He didn't have affairs, not that I knew of, and I believe I would have known. He was present in the physical sense, reliably present in the house, at the dinner table, on holidays. What he was not, and this is the thing I could not name for 30 years, was interested. Not in me. Not in who I was, or what I thought, or what I might have wanted. He was interested in the life I maintained for him. That is a different thing entirely. Happy enough is what I said when people asked, "Are you happy?" The question, the social question, the one that isn't really a question because the expected answer is yes and everyone knows it. Happy enough. Yes, happy enough. And the person asking would nod and move on, and we would both be satisfied with the transaction. I had performed happy enough so many times that I had stopped noticing I was performing it. Let me tell you what the years looked like in practice. Robert came home at 6:30 most evenings. I had dinner ready. He sat in the same chair. He talked about work, not with me, at me. The distinction matters. Talking with someone requires interest in their response. Talking at someone requires only a present body and the occasional nod. I nodded. I had become very good at nodding. On weekends, Robert played golf on Saturday mornings and watched sport on Saturday afternoons and did the crossword on Sunday mornings. These were not activities we shared. They were activities he had. My weekends were the same as my weekdays, which is to say, the house, the children, the organization of the domestic infrastructure that made Robert's leisure possible. I had a book group on the first Thursday of every month. Diane, my closest friend, who has been my closest friend since we met at the school gates when James was 7, was in it with me. The book group was the 1 hour of every month when I talked about ideas rather than logistics. When I said what I thought about a book, and someone was interested in what I thought, I looked forward to book group the way a person dying of thirst looks forward to a glass of water. That tells you something. Robert was not cruel. I want to say that again because I know it is the first question. Was he cruel? Was he abusive? And the honest answer is no, not in any way that would appear in a checklist, not in any way that would satisfy a person looking for a clear villain. What he was indifferent. Indifference is a slow thing. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't break you on a Tuesday in a dramatic, definable way. It accumulates. Year by year, conversation by conversation, the small indifferences layer over each other like sediment until what is underneath, who you were, what you wanted, what you thought, is simply buried. I will give you examples. When I mentioned, in year 12 of our marriage, that I had been thinking about going back into teaching, that I had looked into retraining, that there was a course, Robert said, "Is that really practical? The hours are long and the children still need you here." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't forbid it. He simply raised a practical objection in a reasonable tone and moved on to something else. I didn't take the course. When I mentioned in year 19 that I wanted to take a weekend trip with Diane, a short break, nothing extravagant, a spa in the countryside, Robert said, "That's quite expensive for 2 nights, isn't it?" He wasn't wrong. It was expensive. But he had spent more on golf equipment in that same year without asking whether I thought it was practical. I didn't take the trip. When I mentioned in year 26 that I had been offered a part-time tutoring role at the local secondary school, 2 afternoons a week, teaching A-level English literature to small groups, exactly the thing I had always loved, Robert said, "It's up to you, of course. But with my schedule the way it is, you'd need to sort out your own transport and don't come to me when it's inconvenient." I didn't take the role. 3 times. 3 times over 26 years, I had tried to retrieve something of myself. 3 times a reasonable, calm, unemotional objection had been enough to make me put it back. I need to tell you about the years when the children were teenagers. Because that was when I just started, not clearly, not consciously, to understand that what I had been experiencing had a name. Not abuse. Something quieter than abuse and in some ways harder to leave because it doesn't give you the dramatic moment that says, "Now you know." It gives you 30 years of small moments that only add up when you finally sit down and add them. The summer James turned 17 and Claire turned 15, we went on holiday to Portugal. A villa, a week, the 4 of us. The kind of holiday that looks in photographs like a family at the height of its happiness. The pool, the sun, the meals outside, everyone slightly tanned and laughing. I have a photograph from that holiday, all 4 of us at a restaurant on our last evening. Robert has his arm around me. We are both smiling. I look at that photograph now, and I wonder what I was thinking behind the smile. I think I was thinking about what to cook when we got home. I think I was thinking about whether Claire's uniform still fitted, or whether she needed new shoes before September. I think I was not in that moment thinking about myself at all. On the last night of that holiday, after the children had gone to bed, I sat on the terrace with a glass of wine and looked at the dark outline of the hills and felt something I didn't name at the time. Something that was adjacent to grief. A sense of something slipping. Robert came out and sat down and said, "Good holiday." I said, "Yes." He said, "Back to it on Monday." I said, "Yes." He went inside. I sat with my wine. I thought, when did we stop having conversations? Then I thought, did we ever have conversations? Then I stopped thinking about it because the children were inside and it was getting cold and there were things to pack in the morning. I packed them into a corner of myself and went inside. James left for university 3 years later. The house contracted. I had expected to feel bereft, had prepared for the particular grief of the empty bedroom, the missing voice, the extra place at the dinner table that was no longer needed. And I did feel that. I miss James with the specific, physical ache of a mother who has been proximate to her child's daily life for 18 years. What I had not expected was what I felt in the evenings. In the evenings, with James gone and Claire still at school, the house was quieter than it had been. And in that quietness, with less to manage, with fewer logistics to occupy the foreground of my attention, Robert became more visible. Not in a new way, in a clearer way. The way objects become visible when the light changes, not different objects, just seen differently. I watched Robert eat his dinner in the chair he had eaten dinner in for 20 years, his eyes on the television, his fork moving with the mechanical efficiency of a man who is not tasting what he is eating. I watched him finish, push the plate to one side, pick up the newspaper. He did not ask how my day had been. He had not asked how my day had been I realized, sitting there. I tried to think when he had last asked. Years. I did not know how many years. I sat with my plate and thought, when did this stop and why didn't I notice? The answer, I understand now, was that I had been too busy to notice. The children had been noise and motion and logistics and need, and that noise had filled every room and every hour, and in the middle of all of it, the silence between Robert and me had been invisible. The children leaving did not create the silence. They revealed it. Claire left for her gap year the summer she finished A-levels. Then she went to university. 3 years of visits home, Christmas, Easter. The odd weekend that recalibrated the house around two people again. Two people who had very little to say to each other. I filled the time. I joined a painting class on Monday evenings. I walked more. I read more. I called Diane more often. I found things to do with myself that did not require Robert's participation because his participation was not available. He sat in his chair. He watched his programs. He came to bed at 10:30 and was asleep by 11. On our 35th wedding anniversary, I suggested we go somewhere, not extravagant, just a night away, a restaurant we hadn't been to. Robert said he had a golf tournament that weekend and couldn't we do it the following month? We did not do it the following month. I bought a bottle of good wine. I drank most of it myself while he watched the golf. I sat with my wine and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, I have not been happy in this marriage for a very long time. And then, immediately after, but where would I go? And then, I'm 60 years old. You don't leave at 60, and I put it back in the corner. Before I tell you about the Saturday, I need to stop for just a moment. Because if you have ever told yourself you were happy enough, if you have ever nodded along in a conversation that wasn't with you but at you, if you have ever sat at a dinner table and realized you couldn't remember the last time someone asked how your day was, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. And if this story is sitting somewhere in your chest, give it a like so more women can find it. Okay, the Saturday. The drive home from dropping Claire was 2 hours. We talked about the flat. We talked about whether she had remembered her duvet. We talked about the traffic on the motorway. These are the things we talked about now: logistics, observations, the neutral territory of two people who have run out of anything to say to each other and have learned to fill the silence with the serviceable. I watched the motorway and I thought about Claire's face when we left, the relief on it. Not because she wanted to be rid of us, she had hugged me long and hard, but because she was about to begin. She was 22 and she was about to begin her life and she knew it and it was written on her face. I thought, when did I last look like that? I thought I was 22 in 1985, before Robert, before the house, before the kitchen and the chair and the dinner at 6:30. I thought I have been in the same house for 35 years. I have cooked approximately 11,000 dinners. I have folded a quantity of laundry I cannot calculate. I have attended every parent's evening, every school play, every sports day. I have maintained every relationship in this family, with Robert's mother, who was difficult, and Robert's brother, who was unreliable, and the neighbors and the friends and the infrastructure of a social life that Robert enjoyed without ever contributing to. I have been maintaining this life for 38 years, and what have I had from it? The children, genuinely and completely the children, and what else? The motorway rolled past. I could not think of what else. We came into the kitchen. I put the kettle on. Robert stood in the middle of the room and looked at the quiet and said, "Well, now it's just us." He smiled. He meant it as a good thing. He meant now we can be comfortable. Now the noise and the chaos and the managing of other people's needs is done, and we can settle into whatever this is. Whatever this is. I stood at the kettle. I thought, whatever this is has been here the whole time. The children didn't create it, they obscured it, and now there is nothing to obscure it, and I have to look at it directly. I poured the water. I carried the mugs to the table. Robert sat down with the newspaper. I sat across from him. I looked at him over my mug. He was reading the newspaper. He did not look up. I sat there for perhaps 5 minutes. Then I said, "Robert." He looked up. I said, "Are you happy?" He said, "What?" I said, "In this marriage, are you happy?" He looked at me as though I had said something in a language he hadn't expected. He said, "That's a strange question." I said, "I know, are you?" He thought about it for a moment. He said, "It's fine, isn't it? Everything's fine." I said, "Yes." I drank my tea. He went back to the newspaper. I sat there and I thought, fine, there it was, fine. After 38 years. I did not tell anyone, not immediately. I spent 3 weeks living in the house with Robert and the knowledge that had arrived, clear and irrevocable, in the kitchen on the Saturday. I went about my days. I made meals. I watched television. I slept in the same bed. I functioned normally. I was very good at functioning normally, but something had changed underneath the function. I had stopped telling myself that this was fine. And once I stopped telling myself that, the accumulated weight of 38 years of fine became extraordinary. Not dramatic, not violent, just vast, the sheer weight of it. The years of turning down jobs and trips and versions of myself because the reasonable objection had been enough to make me put them back. The years of dinner at 6:30. The years of nodding. The years of book group as the 1 hour of genuine engagement per month. I had a conversation with Diane on the phone on the second Thursday after the Saturday. I said, "Diane, I need to ask you something." She said, "What?" I said, "Have I seemed unhappy to you for a long time?" A pause. She said, "Margaret." I said, "Tell me honestly." She said, "I have been waiting for you to ask that question for approximately 15 years. I closed my eyes. I said, "Why didn't you say anything?" She said, "Because you weren't ready to hear it, and because it wasn't my marriage to have opinions about." She paused. She said, "Are you ready now?" I said, "I think so." She said, "Good, come over." I went over. I sat at Diane's kitchen table, which is round and painted yellow and always has flowers on it, which is so different from my own kitchen table that the difference felt symbolic. And I talked for 2 hours. I talked about the teaching I hadn't gone back to and the trips I hadn't taken and the tutoring role I hadn't accepted. I talked about the anniversary wine I had drunk alone. I talked about the drive home from dropping Claire and the newspaper and the word fine. Diane listened to all of it. At the end she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to leave." She said, "Okay." She said it the way you say something when you have been waiting a long time to hear the other person say their part. I said, "I'm 62. She said, "I know." I said, "People will think it's mad." She said, "Some people will, the people who matter won't." I said, "I don't know who I am outside of this marriage." She said, "I know, that's the exciting part." I looked at her. She said, "Margaret, you are the most intelligent, capable, underused woman I have known for 30 years. Whatever is on the other side of this, you are going to be extraordinary in it." I did not cry. I had been trained across 38 years not to cry at the table. I cried in the car on the way home. I cried for a long time. They were not unhappy tears. I called the solicitor on the Monday of the 3rd week. Her name was Carol Webb. She had been recommended by Diane, who had a colleague who had used her. She was in her 50s, direct, unhurried, with the particular calm of a woman who has sat with people in the worst moments of their lives for 20 years and has learned to create safety in a room by simply being steady in it. I sat in her office and I told her what I had. 38 years of marriage, a house we owned jointly, Robert's pension, which was substantial, my own contributions, which Carol referred to calmly and without drama as the non-financial contribution, which is to say, 38 years of domestic labor, child-rearing, social maintenance, the invisible work that had made Robert's career and leisure possible. She told me my position was stronger than I thought. She told me the law was clear on the value of non-financial contribution. She told me I was not, as I had half feared, leaving with nothing. I walked out of her office onto the high street and I stood in the October air and I thought, I am going to do this. Not with triumph, not with anger, just with the quiet certainty of someone who has finally, after a long time, made the decision they should have made sooner and knows it is the right one. I told Robert on a Saturday evening. The children were not home. I had chosen the timing carefully not because I wanted to ambush him, but because I did not want James and Claire to be present for something that was between their parents and nobody else. He was in his chair. I turned the television off. He looked up. I sat across from him. I had chosen the chair deliberately, not the sofa beside him, but the chair that faced him. I wanted to be able to look at him directly. I said, Robert, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. He said, that's ominous. I said, I'm leaving the marriage. The room was very still. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I want a divorce. I've spoken to a solicitor. I want to do this in the most straightforward way possible, and I have no interest in making it difficult, but I want you to know first. He stared at me. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I've been unhappy for a long time. I don't think you've been paying close enough attention to notice. And I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because I think it's true. He said, we've just had 38 years together. I said, yes. He said, the kids have just left. I said, I know, that's what made me realize. He said, realize what? I said, that without them in the middle, there wasn't very much left. He looked at me for a long time. He said, Margaret, you can't be serious. I said, I am. He said, we're 62. Where are you going to go? I said, I'll find somewhere. He said, this is ridiculous. I said, I know it doesn't make sense to you. I'm sorry for that. He said, you're sorry? You're sorry? I said, Robert, when did you last ask me how I was? Not how dinner was or whether the post had come, how I was. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He said, that's not. I said, it's been years. I've been in this house for years and you haven't asked once. He said, that's not how I show. I said, I know it's not how you show things. I'm not angry at you for who you are. I'm just telling you that who you are and what you need and what I need have not been compatible for a very long time, and I have been adjusting for that incompatibility at considerable cost to myself, and I can't continue to do it. He looked at his hands. He said, I didn't know you felt like this. I said, I know. He said, why didn't you say something? I said, I tried. 3 times, the teaching, the trip with Diane, the tutoring role. He looked up. I said, you gave me practical objections each time in a reasonable voice and I accepted them. He said, I didn't mean. I said, I know you didn't mean to. I know it wasn't calculated. That doesn't change what it cost. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, and this is the part I want you to hear, the part that told me more than anything else that I had made the right decision. He said, but what will I do about dinner? Not, I love you, not, let's find a way, not, I don't want to lose you, dinner. After 38 years, dinner, I stood up. I said, that, Robert, is the right question. I went to bed. The months that followed were the hardest of my adult life and some of the most alive I have ever felt. Both things simultaneously. That surprised me. The hard parts were real and I will not pretend otherwise. The legal process, which Carol managed with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times, which was both professional and, I found, vaguely comforting, took 8 months. There were negotiations about the house, about Robert's pension, about the settlement. I was well advised and I did not come out of it poorly. The years of non-financial contribution were counted. They had weight. But the legal process was the easy, hard thing. The difficult, hard thing was the identity. I had been Margaret and Robert for 38 years. Before that, I had been someone's daughter, someone's student, someone's girlfriend. I had not been simply Margaret, a Margaret with no relational suffix, since before I could clearly remember. I did not know at 62 what Margaret alone looked like. I found out. I moved into a flat in October. The 2nd October after the Saturday, 1 year after. 2 bedrooms, the second of which I turned into a study. A small garden I had not expected to love as much as I did. The first night I cooked dinner for one. I cooked it carefully. I chose something I liked rather than something Robert liked. I ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on and a glass of wine and a book open beside my plate. I sat there after with the second glass of wine and I thought, this is mine, not the flat, well, the flat, yes, but more than the flat. This evening, this quiet, this glass of wine chosen by me, this book, this radio program about something I was interested in. Mine, it was a very small thing, it was enormous. I called Carol Webb, the solicitor, in November, not about legal matters, just to thank her. She said, "How are you?" I said, "Actually well, I'm actually well." She said, "I know you will be. I see a lot of women in your position, Margaret. The ones who leave at 60 are the bravest." I said, "I don't feel brave." She said, "That's because brave people never do." I went back to teaching. Not full-time. A part-time role at a sixth form college, 2 days a week, A-level English literature, exactly what I had wanted 16 years ago when Robert had made the practical objection. I applied in January. I was offered the position in February. I sat with the offer letter and I held it for a long time. I thought of the jobs I had not taken, the trips I had not gone on, the versions of myself I had quietly filed away. I thought, not this time. I accepted the role on a Thursday afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table in my flat, with no one to ask whether it was practical. I started in September. The first class I taught was a group of 17-year-olds studying a novel they were suspicious of, in the particular way of 17-year-olds confronted with something they haven't chosen. By the end of the lesson, 2 of them had asked questions I hadn't expected. By the end of the first term, I was looking forward to Monday mornings. I had not looked forward to Monday mornings in 20 years. James called me 2 months after I told him. He had time by then to sit with it. The initial conversation had been difficult, not hostile, but shocked, the particular shock of an adult child confronting evidence that their parents' marriage was not what they had understood it to be. He said, "Mum, can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Were you unhappy when we were growing up, when we were there?" I thought about this carefully. I said, "There were moments of happiness. Real ones, you and Claire being your mother, that was never anything but real." I said, "But the marriage, yes, I think I was unhappy in the marriage for a long time and I was too busy and too afraid and too used to the adjustment to do anything about it." He was quiet. He said, "I wish you'd said something sooner." I said, "I know, so do I." He said, "Are you happy now?" I thought about my flat and my teaching and my garden and the dinners I ate from books. I said yes, genuinely yes, for the first time in a long time. He said, "Good." A pause. He said, "Dad called me. He said he doesn't know how to cook." I said, "He'll learn." James laughed. It was the first time either of us had laughed in that conversation. He said, "You sound different." I said, "I know." He said, "You sound like you." Claire took longer. Claire is her father's daughter in some ways. The precision, the difficulty with things that don't fit a clear narrative. She came to visit me in my flat in November and she walked around it with the contained expression of someone processing something they haven't decided how to feel about yet. She sat down. She looked at the bookshelf I had arranged by color because I could, because there was no one to tell me it was impractical. She said, "Mum, did you stay for us?" I said, "Partly." "Yes," she said, "I don't know how to feel about that." I said, "I know, it's complicated." She said, "Are you angry at us?" I said, "No, never, not for 1 second." She said, "Are you angry at yourself?" I thought about that. I said, "A little, for waiting so long. But mostly I've made my peace with it. I had to be the person who made the choices I made in order to get here, and here is not a bad place." She looked at the bookshelf again. She said, "The books are in color order." I said, "I know." She said, "That's completely irrational." I said, "Yes." She said, "I love it." She looked at me. She said, "You seem lighter." I said, "I am lighter." She came over and she sat next to me on the sofa and she put her head on my shoulder the way she had when she was 7, the way adult children occasionally revert to when they have found their way back to something. We sat like that for a while. I put my arm around her. I thought, I will not cry. I cried anyway. Good tears. It has been 2 years since the Saturday. I teach Mondays and Wednesdays. I paint on Thursday evenings, a class I found in a community arts space 10 minutes from the flat. I am not talented. I do not care. I make mess on a canvas for 2 hours and come home feeling wrung out in the best possible way. I have dinner with Diane every other Friday. We sit at her yellow table and we talk about books and our children and our lives. And we have been doing this for 32 years and it is one of the best things in my life. I went to Florence in March. Alone. 5 days. I had wanted to go to Florence since I was 23 and had studied Renaissance art in my 3rd year at university and had looked at reproductions in books and thought, I will go one day. One day took 39 years. I stood in front of Botticelli's Primavera in the Uffizi, and I stood there for 20 minutes and nobody said anything about whether we should move on and nobody said it was time for lunch. I stood there until I was ready to leave. Then I went for lunch alone at a small restaurant near the river and I ate fish and drank a glass of white wine and read my book. I thought, I am 62 years old and I am eating fish in Florence and reading my book, and I have never in my entire adult life felt more like myself. Robert and I are civil. He has apparently learned to cook. James mentioned it with a surprise that I found quietly satisfying. I do not wish him ill. I think we were two people who were not right for each other who stayed together because the cost of leaving felt too high, and because the children needed us to stay, and because we were both afraid of the alternative. The fear was not irrational. The alternative is genuinely frightening when you have built your entire identity within a marriage and don't know who you are outside it. What I know now is that the fear was the wrong calculation, not because the alternative was easy. It wasn't. The first months were lonely in ways I hadn't anticipated. The logistics of living alone after 38 years of shared domestic life are more complex than they appear. But the loneliness of being alone is a different thing entirely from the loneliness of being in a marriage with someone who doesn't see you. The first kind is temporary. The second kind, if you stay, becomes permanent. I want to say something to the women who are sitting with the thing I sat with, the thing I put in the corner for 15 years, the thing I picked up briefly and looked at and put back because I was 60, because we'd been together 30 years, because where would I go, because people would think it was mad, because it was just fine, wasn't it? Everything was just fine. Here is what I know. Fine is not a life. Fine is the absence of bad things. Fine is survival. Fine is what you say to people who ask the social question and don't want a real answer. You deserve more than fine. You deserved it at 40 and at 50, and you deserve it at 60 and 70 and every year after that. The years you have left are not fewer than the years you've had. They are your years. They are not the years of the marriage that didn't ask how you were. They are not the years of the dinners at 6:30 and the nodding and the adjustments. They are yours. Take them. I think about the Saturday often, not with bitterness, with something more like gratitude, the particular gratitude of a person who was shown something clearly at last, after a long time of choosing not to look. Robert stood in the kitchen and said, "Now it's just us," and meant it as a comfort. And it was a comfort. Just not the way he intended. It was the comfort of clarity. Of the moment when the thing you have been managing and adjusting for and quietly setting aside for 38 years becomes, suddenly, undeniable. I am glad I was standing at the kettle. I am glad I didn't turn around, because if I had turned around, I might have smiled. I might have said, "Yes, just us." I might have carried the mugs to the table and picked up my book and told myself it was fine. And I might have stayed. I am so glad I didn't stay. Florence on a Tuesday in March with Botticelli's Primavera and a glass of white wine and a table to myself and no one to tell me it was time to move on. That is what was waiting on the other side of the Saturday. It took me 62 years to get there. It was worth every single year. If you have ever told yourself you were happy enough, if the word fine has been doing work in your life that shouldn't have to do, I want to hear from you. You don't have to be 62. You don't have to have 38 years behind you. You just have to be honest with yourself about the weight of the thing in the corner. The thing you keep looking at and putting back. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me what fine looks like in your life. Tell me what you're afraid of. Tell me what you want. I read every single one. And if Margaret's story reached you today, share it. With one woman who is sitting with the Saturday she hasn't had yet. With one woman who is standing at the kettle and hasn't turned around. Tell her what's waiting on the other side. Hit subscribe now, please.